This video covers the instructions for the comfy chair kit from Bentley House Minis in both 1/12 scale and 1/24 scale. Both of these kits come with the pieces to create the interior structure, the legs of the chairs, and they come with the quilt batting to create the comfy cushioning. However, the kit does not come with fabric. Fabric needs to be provided by the person who is completing the kit. I suggest a thin fabric, especially for the 1/24 scale chair. However, you want to make sure it's not so thin that you can see through it when it's held up against different colors. So you can check this by putting it up against a piece of cardboard and a piece of white paper to see if you can see those colors through the fabric. If you can't, then that fabric is perfect. We're going to start with the 1/12 scale chair, but anytime the 1/24 scale chair is on screen, I will put this yellow text so that you know that's what we're looking at. We are going to start with the interior chair structure. First, you need to glue together all the pieces that are marked with the letter D. All of them have this little notch in the back of the piece. After that, you're going to glue piece C underneath all of the D pieces, making sure that the rounded front edge lines up. This is how it should look once they're all attached. You will follow the same exact steps for the 1/24 scale chair, and this is how it looks once it's all glued together. Back to the 1/12 scale chair, we will now put together the back. This is going to include pieces A, B, E, and 2 pieces marked F. You're going to glue both of the F pieces on top of piece A. There is a thinner side to piece F, and that is going to be towards the top. Next, you're going to glue the longer side of piece E. There is one side that's longer than the other. Glue that on top of piece B, and this is going to be glued along the edge that's just above the notch. This is how it should look when it's glued together. Now you can add glue to the edges of the E and F pieces that you previously glued, and you're going to sandwich them together to create the back of your chair. I'm using hot glue here so it goes together quickly, but you can also use regular PVA glue. You may just have to wait longer for it to dry. Here's how the back of the chair looks once it's complete. You will have the notch towards the front, which is going to be inserted into your chair seat. This is how the 2 pieces go together. Dry fit them at first to make sure everything looks good, and then you can add glue into the areas where the 2 pieces touch so that they are permanently attached. You may find at this time that you're getting little bits of ash on your hands from the laser cut edges. Once you have this piece together, I highly suggest dusting the ash off the sides of the cardboard so that it doesn't transfer to the fabric when you get to the upholstery. You're going to follow the same exact steps for the 1/24 scale. Glue the F pieces so that the thinnest side of the F pieces is towards the top. Glue that on top of piece A. This is how it looks once it's done. And then you're going to glue piece E on top of piece B, making sure that the longest edge on piece E is glued along this edge that's just above the notch on piece B. This is how it should look once it's put together. To attach both pieces, you're going to add glue along the edges of pieces F and piece E, and then sandwich them together to get the back of your chair. Once that piece has completely dried, you're going to insert the notch at the bottom of the chair back into the chair seat. Dry fit it first to make sure everything looks good, and then you can add glue to the pieces that touch and permanently glue the back of the chair and the bottom of the chair together. This is how it should look, and then we can move on to the next step. To create the structure for your chair arms, you're going to need 8 pieces marked G, 2 pieces marked I, and 2 pieces marked J. As we did before, we'll start with the 1/12 scale version. To begin assembling your chair arms, first place the I and J pieces facing each other flat on your work surface as you see on my screen. I also want to point out at this time that the pieces marked with G have a more rounded side versus a flatter side. I will be referring to the rounded side and flatter side of the G pieces as we work through the chair arms. The G pieces are going to slot into I and J at various points, and I will make sure and show you those as we go along. I'm going to grab my first G piece, and you can see the slots in the top and the bottom. We are going to start in the center slot of the arm. Those are going to be the two slots that are most obviously opposite each other. Before adding them into these pieces, I am going to add some glue into the slots in the top and bottom of piece G. Now I can slide it into the openings on piece I and J that I previously mentioned. As I am doing this, I'm making sure that the rounded side of piece G is facing towards me. So this is how my piece looks as I'm starting to put it together. You can see the rounded side is over here. This is our first step to putting together the chair arm. In the next step, I'm going to put it on the next slot forward, and I'm making sure that the rounded side of the arm is matching the same rounded side as the previous G piece that I inserted. If you'd like to, you can first dry fit this piece so you understand where it's going. Here you can see it's pretty much parallel to the previous piece. Once you're happy with how it fits, add some glue and glue it onto your I and J pieces. On the next piece, I'm continuing to make sure my rounded side matches all of the others. This one is going to be angled back. Once you're comfortable with the fit, add glue in all the places it's going to touch, especially against the previously glued G piece. This will help keep the structure very secure. This is how your arm construction should be looking so far. Again, as you can see, all of the rounded sides are on the same side. Now I'm going to add my final piece. This is going to be the back of our chair arm. I'm adding glue onto the I and J pieces and then carefully adding on the remaining G piece, and this is going to complete the interior structure for our chair arm. I will set this to the side to dry completely, and for this part I was using tacky glue because it gives me a little bit more working time as opposed to hot glue. Now we're going to follow these same exact steps for the other arm, however it is going to be mirrored. My I and J pieces are facing the opposite direction, so I'm going to make sure that the rounded side of my G pieces are staying up like they were before, and this is going to create a mirrored effect once it's put onto the chair. So now I'm going to start with the exact same centerpiece that I did before. I'm going to add in my first G piece in the center and then slowly add them where I add the next piece in front of it, the front piece, and then finally the last G piece at the back of the arm. And this is how they should look once they're done. We're following these same exact steps for the 1/24 scale chair, so I will skip forward with that. It is just they are a bit smaller, so do take care and go slowly with this process. But they will look the same once you're done as the 1/12 scale. Once the chair arms are complete, you may notice that there is a bit of piece I or J that's sticking out from the G pieces. You only have to worry about this at the front or back of the armchair construction. If you see those, just simply clip them off with some flush cutters or cut them off with a sharp craft blade. Be careful of your fingers. I'm going to do this for the 1/24 scale and the 1/12 scale. Now that my 1/12 scale arm construction pieces have dried, I'm going to take the 3-inch wide piece of cardstock from my kit and I'm going to wrap it around the piece I just created. I'm going to show you two methods to do this. The first one, if you're not very certain about your wrapping skills, you can first dry fit it, and then you do want to cut off the excess because you're only going to be using half of this 3-inch wide sheet for the first arm and then half for the second arm. So you want to make sure that you do cut off the excess and keep it. While holding the cardstock in place, I am going to carefully cut around the front and back edge of the arm so that there is absolutely no overhang. I want it to be flush with the G pieces I previously installed. Once you're done with this process, you can remove your cardstock, and if you want to clean up any of the edges, you can. But you should have a perfectly fit piece of cardstock that wraps around your arm construction. This is going to give you a better surface to add your upholstery. Now, if you would like to, you can add an L for left and an R for right to keep everything straight. Now that I have my cardstock covering ready to go, I can add glue onto my arm construction and then re-wrap it. Now the other method is you can just go ahead and add glue to begin with. I will show you that with the 1/24 scale. If you're confident with your cutting skills and you aren't worried about messing up the cardstock, you can just go ahead and glue it straight on. But now I am adding my cardstock covering back on, making sure that everything is glued down, and I'm going to let that dry. If you're worried about adding it back on, just write top at the very top so you know where the pieces need to go once you're adding it back onto your arm. Once I'm done with both sides, I have both sides covered, this is how it should look up against my chair. And it's definitely starting to look more like a comfy chair at this point. Make sure not to glue the arms on just yet. And as I said with the 1/24 scale, I am adding glue and using my 1.5 inch sheet of cardstock to wrap around the arm construction. This is just going to be an easier method, and I'm just going to have to be very careful when I'm cutting around the front and the back that I don't cut too much off of my cardstock. I am going to be using flush cutters here just because they are a little bit easier to control when it comes to such a small piece. These 1/24 scale pieces do get rather tiny. And here's how they look once both of them are covered in a layer of cardstock. You can dry fit them to the chair, but again, do not glue them on at this time. It's now time to upholster, so be sure to grab your quilt batting and whatever fabric you're choosing for this project. I'm going to start adding my quilt batting to the top of my chair seat. I'm going to do a couple layers here. They don't have to be super neat. Just kind of think about once fabric is added over it. And if you want to do a test to see what it will look like, you can just kind of squish fabric on top of it to see if you like how it's looking. I'm adding 3 layers on the top and just kind of going with a shape that I think works for the back of the chair. You can change this up and do whatever shapes you like. I'm adding this with tacky glue. That seems to be a really good glue for holding all of the pieces in place. We're only adding quilt batting to the front of the chair back, to the top of the chair seat, and for the 1/12 scale version only, we will be adding a strip of batting that's going up the side, across the top of the back, and down the other side. This is going to help cover up some of those gaps that are in our cardboard construction and make it a little bit easier to upholster. Once you have that strip, you can cut off any excess and you should be done with the quilt batting portion of this project. You can now get out whatever fabric you are covering your chair in. Here is the 1/24 scale covered in batting. As you can see, we do not have the strip that's going up and over the side of the chair, so leave that blank. This helps keep the bulk of the chair down so it looks like it's staying more in the 1/24 scale range. We're going to start adding our fabric over the chair seat first. You want to make sure that it's mostly flat and you want to iron it before adding your fabric on if you see any wrinkles. I'm starting with a 4 inch by 4 inch square, but you can do a smaller square than that, maybe 3 inches by 3 inches. And I'm going to hem one edge with just a little bit of glue. When you're adding glue to fabric, make sure you don't add too much because you don't want it to seep through the front of the fabric and leave a glue mark. To add the fabric to the chair, I'm first adding some glue into the crease between the chair seat and the chair back, and then I'm adding glue all around the edge of the chair seat. I don't want to add it to the very top of the chair because I don't want to risk glue coming through the top of my chair upholstery. So now I'm pushing it into the glue and then smoothing the edges of the fabric over the side of the chair so that it gets into the glue and starts to take hold. I'm making sure that my fabric is pushed as far back into that chair crease as possible, and then I'm going to start cutting the excess fabric away from the edge of the chair. I don't want it to extend past the bottom of the chair seat. Here you can see it's about a 1/2 inch worth of fabric. Then I can go around and add glue, making sure that I'm pushing the chair fabric down onto the cardboard and letting the tacky glue take hold. When it comes to the corners of the chair, I'm adding a little bit of extra glue in that corner flap, and then I'm going to push the flap together so that it kind of sandwiches the glue in between. You can either cut these pieces off, but for my 1/12 scale version, I'm actually going to be folding them down. To do this, I'm just adding a little dab of glue onto my folded piece and then pushing it down to the back. So it's going to glue backwards onto the side of my chair. And this is how I'm going to handle the corners on the 1/12 scale version. We will do it different when we get to the 1/24 scale. Now I'm going to do the same thing for my fabric that's upholstering the front of the back of my chair. And this is going to be hemmed on one edge, and then I'm going to push that hem into the crease between the back of the chair and the seat. I added glue around the edges just like I did before, and now I am smoothing my fabric into the glue and allowing it to take hold. This is the part of the chair that will catch people's eye the most, so make sure that you take time to smooth it out as best as possible. Once the glue takes hold, you can do the same process of cutting down the fabric so that there's just a little bit extra on the sides. You're going to snip into the area where there is a curve along the side of the chair. You want to snip just almost to the edge, but you want to leave a little bit of fabric that's still connected. You don't want to snip all the way to the quilt batting. This is going to make sure that you don't have any gaps where you can see the quilt batting through your fabric. Once you have your corners snipped, you can add glue to the quilt batting, and then you're slowly going to start folding down the fabric over the quilt batting. As you can see, the snipped edges help it fold down a little bit more smoothly. It won't look great where it's folded down, but that will be covered later. You want to follow the same steps when it comes to the corners, where you add a bit of glue and then sandwich the corners together. Again, we are going to add glue to the very tip of that and then fold it down along the side of the chair. This is going to be different when we get to the 1/24 scale version. This is how it should look once you've successfully upholstered the chair seat and the front of the chair back. Now we can upholster the back of the chair. You won't need any quilt batting for this area, and you do not need to pre-hem the fabric. You just need a piece that's large enough to cover this area. You're going to add some tacky glue on top of the cardboard. However, you want to make sure that you spread it thin so that none of the drops of glue go through the fabric. Make sure you remove it from your finger if that's what you're using to spread it thin. Then you can lay your fabric on top, making sure that it's centered on the back of your chair. I'm going to push it into the glue and make sure that it's taking hold. We're following the same exact steps we just did for the front of the chair, where you're cutting a strip of fabric around the outside. You're going to snip into the edges in the rounded area and then slowly fold the fabric over. You want to make sure that you don't have too much fabric where the fabric is folding over the front of the chair. You want to make sure it only goes about halfway so that it will be covered with the strip of fabric eventually we will put over the side of the chair. You're also going to push it down over the bottom edge of the chair just underneath the cardboard. And again, at the corners, you're going to add glue, sandwich it, and then you can press them down along the sides. Once you've done this for each corner, this will complete this part of the upholstery, and I will go ahead and show you the same steps, but on the 1/24 scale version. The 1/24 scale version is very much the same. You will hem your first square of fabric and push it into the crease and glue it down the sides of the chair like we did before. When you get to the corners, when you add glue and sandwich the glue in between, you are going to want to cut the corners off and not lay them down. When you're working with 1/24 scale, you want to make sure you're keeping down the bulk as much as possible. Again, you are going to do the back just like we did before. However, you are going to cut off the corners, as you can kind of see here, even though I did it off of camera. You're going to cut those corners off so that you have nice crisp corners without any edges laying down. We're following the same steps for the back of the chair, making sure that you don't have too much fabric where it's coming around to the front that you already upholstered, and then cutting off any of the excess corners. And that's how you complete the upholstery section of this part of the chair. Now we're going to move on to the strips that cover up all of the rough edges we just created. Back to the 1/12 scale, you're going to start with a 1/2-inch strip of cardstock from your cardstock sheet. You're going to cover it in the matching fabric for your chair. You can add glue, smooth it out, and then glue it onto your fabric. You want to make sure that you have a little bit on each edge of the cardstock strip so that you can fold the fabric over. I'm adding some more glue onto the edge that I'm going to fold first, and then I'm carefully pushing the fabric over the cardstock so that it takes hold into the tacky glue. This is a little bit of a tedious process trying to get this to look right, but it does make your chair look really sharp and it covers up all of those edges we don't want anyone to see. Once you've completely covered your cardstock piece, we are going to test fit it over the back part of our chair. We want to do a dry fit where we pre-bend the cardstock with the fabric so we know what the shape is going to look like, and we want to make sure that all of our fabric edges are covered. Once I have it pre-bent and I'm happy with the fit, I can add glue to the back of my cardstock strip, and then it can be added back onto the chair construction, making sure that it covers up all of the edges of our fabric. I'm making sure that it's centered on the back of my chair, and then as I push it down the side of my chair, I'm making sure it remains centered. Once it's glued on correctly, it should look something like this so that you have a very nice finished edge to your fabric. You will have some excess cardstock and fabric sticking down at the bottom. You can just take a pair of scissors and cut any extra off. Now we've covered the back of the chair, we're going to move on to the seat. The seat is going to be made from the 3/4 inch thick piece of cardstock in your cardstock sheet. We are once again going to cover that with our matching fabric, and then I'm going to hold it up to the side of my chair. You will notice there's a slight angle from where the piece that I just used to cover the back of the chair comes down. I'm going to use my scissors to cut my piece at that angle, and as you can see here, that is where I'm going to start gluing down my strip of covering. Before I do that, I do want to fray check my fabric. Now this most likely will be covered by the chair arm, but I like to make sure that all of my fabric is fray checked. Once that's done, I can add glue onto the side and the front of my chair seat, making sure not to get any glue where I don't want it to be. And then I can glue down my strip, making sure that it's lining up with the very bottom edge of the cardboard. I want to make sure that it's covering up any cardboard that you can see at the bottom of the chair seat. Now I'm not going to be gluing down the other side of my strip yet. I'm just going to let that hang there while I try to match the angle on the other side. I'm cutting my cardstock strip covered with fabric a little bit too long, and this is so that I can slowly cut my piece back until it fits perfectly. This may take 3 or 4 cuts until I have it to the right size. Once I have it cut to the correct length and the correct angle that I want, I can glue this side of the strip down. Again, this will mostly be covered by the chair arm, so it's not that big of a deal if you don't get the angle and the cut perfect, but I'm just showing you how I try to get it as best as I can. I did fray check the end of that fabric right before I glued it down, and now I'm done with the strip of fabric that's going around the front edge and the sides of my seat. If you do see any excess glue sticking up, make sure you remove it before it dries. We are going to follow the same steps for the 1/24 scale chair, but of course the cardstock strips are going to be thinner. So we're starting with a 1/4 inch cardstock strip, and I'm going to be putting that around my paper. Now this paper is very thin to keep down the bulk, so just be careful as you fold it over and try to keep it as crisp as possible. We're going to pre-bend it around the back edge of the chair, and then once we're happy with the pre-bend, then you can add glue and then glue it into place permanently. You will have some excess sticking out on the bottom, so make sure you chop that off with a sharp pair of scissors. This is how the back is looking, and now we can do the front. The front is going to be another 1/4 inch thick strip of paper that is covered with fabric. We're going to follow the same steps where we fray check the edge of the fabric, add it onto the side and the front of the chair first and let that dry. And then, just like the 1/12 scale, when we get to the other side of the chair, I'm going to slowly snip away at the cardstock strip until it is the exact right length that's going to fit up against the strip that I just previously glued on the back of the chair. I'm going to glue that down in place, making sure that I fray check the fabric, and now this part of the 1/24 scale kit is complete. Set the main body of these chair pieces down off to the side and let them dry. Now we can focus on upholstering the chair arms. When we first put the cardstock on, it didn't really matter where the seam showed up. However, when we're adding the fabric, we want to make sure that the seam is hidden by the chair seat once the arms are attached. So I am first laying my fabric down and trying to figure out where the seam will fit best. I can use my chair to make sure that it will be hidden. I'm going to have a little excess fabric that comes out the front and the back of the arm, and I will cut that down later. I'm adding a simple mark with a pin so that I know where I need to start gluing my fabric, so when it wraps around, the seam lays correctly. Then I can add my first layer of glue. This layer of glue can be kind of thick, and I'm not really worrying about it because it will be covered by another layer of fabric. I'm going to let that take hold, and then I can add glue to the other parts of my cardstock. This time I do want to make sure that my glue is not too thick, so I'm going to run my finger over the globs of glue to thin them out. Then I can make my fabric go over the shape of the chair arm, laying it down flat and making sure that it's pulled rather tight. I can continue adding glue all the way down to where it will fold over my first part of the fabric. This should create my seam, which will eventually be hidden by the chair seat. Now that the bulk of the fabric is glued down, I can go and cut the excess away from the front and the back of the chair arm. I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch all the way around because I'm going to fold this over the front of my chair arm. You may want to add a little glue between the layers of fabric where the fabric meets so it feels like one piece of fabric as we move forward. I'm going to take a sharp set of scissors and cut my slits into the fabric. Remember, leaving a little tiny sliver of fabric that is uncut right before the edge of the chair arm. This is so that you don't see it through the fabric that's cut. You're going to fold over the cut fabric and get it as tight as you can against the corner. There may be some parts of the fabric that fold down onto other parts of fabric, so you may need to add more glue as you go along. You want to try and get this as flat as possible. You're going to do this for the front and the back. Once it's done, it should look like this. Do these same steps for the other arm of your chair. Once that's complete, locate the cardstock pieces that are the same shape as your chair arms. You will notice there is a more rounded side to these pieces as well. You're going to get a flat piece of fabric that matches the fabric for your arms, and you want to glue these pieces down with a thin layer of glue. You are going to glue these down in pairs, making sure that they face away from each other, and you want to make sure to leave a little bit of fabric in between each glued piece. Making sure that your first two pieces mirror your second two pieces will ensure that they are facing the correct way when you go to add them on to your chair arms. I'm now going to cut away so that I have about 1/8 inch of fabric around the cardstock piece. I'm going to snip very carefully around the edges so I have small pieces to fold over, and then I'm adding glue onto just one side so I have a clean side to hold onto, and then I'm carefully folding the fabric over the edge. Once I have the first edge that I'm happy with, I can add glue to the other side so that I have something clean to hold on to, and then fold over the opposite edge. I'm trying to get it to look as much like the original cardstock shape as possible, and if you happen to have any bulky pieces, you can go back and cut them off carefully. This should give you the perfect shape to glue on either the front or the back of your armchair. Dry fit it at first to make sure that you have it on the correct side, and then add glue and make sure that you press down firmly so that it takes hold to the chair arm. Once it's glued down correctly, it should look like this and give a nice finish. Follow the same steps to do a similar process to the back of the chair arm, and then do the same process again for the mirrored chair arm. This should give you two mirrored arms where the seams are to the lower inside. When they're attached onto the chair, they will be hidden by the chair seat. You can now put these to the side to dry. Do not glue the arms on yet, and we will work on the 1/24 scale. It's going to be following the exact same steps where you wrap the fabric around the chair arm, making sure the seam will be hidden by the seat. Fold in the excess fabric and then find your cardstock pieces that are going to cover the ends. Now with 1/24 scale, it gets increasingly difficult to keep the bulk down. So for this, I suggest using a marker that will blend in with your chosen fabric to go around the edge of the cardstock pieces. We're doing this because we are going to cut the fabric exactly along the edge. It's very important when you're gluing down these pieces that you get an even layer of glue because this will fray check your fabric once it's attached to the cardstock piece. When it's glued down and dried, take a very sharp pair of scissors and cut around the cardstock piece. Because we pre-colored in the edges, you will not see the white edges once it's attached to the chair. Add glue to the back of your cardstock piece and gently press it onto the front or back of your chair arm. This is a little bit fiddly. Make sure you are keeping the glue off of your fingers and off of the cover of your fabric. If you do have any concerns about your specific fabric fraying, you can take a toothpick and a very small amount of PVA glue and go around the edge of the piece you just glued on. Make sure you remove any excess and go slowly as you do this. You want to take your time and make sure that the glue only goes into the spots that you want it to. You're going to do this for the front and back of your chair arm until you have finished pieces that look like this. These pieces, just as we did for the 1/12 scale, are going to fit up against the side of the chair. Do not glue them in place yet. We still have another step to complete. To create the base for your chair, you need to find the 2 H pieces that are still connected in your cardboard sheets. You want to glue those 2 pieces together and let them dry. This is going to create your base. Get a piece of fabric that matches the rest of the fabric of your chair and completely cover the top of this piece. This piece does not have to look super nice. It will mostly be covered, but it's just in case you can see it at any point, you want it to be covered by matching fabric. I'm adding glue to the center, and I'm adding quite a bit of glue because the rest of the chair is going to be glued on top of this fabric, so I want to make it secure. And then I'm going to add glue to the edges of my H pieces and glue those down the side, making sure to add even more glue in the corners so that when I push those corners together, they connect, and then I can glue them down like I have on the previously upholstered pieces. I just add a dab of glue and then fold them to the back. Now we have an upholstered H piece, which is going to be the base of our chair. You now want to add glue to the base of your chair seat. This is what's going to connect to the base we just created. Add glue all around, making sure not to get too much at the edges where it might seep out, and then center it, making sure that you line up the front edge of the chair seat with the front edge of the base. You want to have equal sides on piece H sticking out from either side of the chair. These sides are what's going to support your chair arms. Once it's glued in place, this is what it should look like. Next, you're going to want to dry fit your chair arms. It's important to make sure that you have them on the correct side before you officially glue them down. I'm adding glue to the bottom of the chair arm where it's going to sit on top of the base I just created, and then I'm adding glue in any other spot that I know it will connect with another part of the chair. For the 1/12 scale version, I am adding a dab of hot glue because I know this will take hold a lot faster, and there is enough space to do this, but I do have a precision tip on my hot glue gun, so make sure you're very confident with your hot glue placement because you don't want a big glob of hot glue on your finished piece. I'm going to add the other arm in just the same method, making sure that they line up on both sides. Once it's attached to your chair and attached to the base, you should have a piece that looks like this. We have one final cardstock strip to cover in fabric. This is a 3/8 inch thick piece from your cardstock sheet, and I'm going to cover this just like I did the other ones. This one is going to cover the connection between the chair and the base. I'm going to start at the front and carefully pre-bend the cardstock strip to make sure that it goes all the way around my chair. Once I'm happy with the pre-bend process, I can start gluing it in place, starting with the front edge of the chair. I want to make sure that it covers up any remaining cardboard edges, and in fact mine does hang down just a little bit past the cardboard just to ensure you won't see it at all. I'm carefully going around the front and the sides, allowing the back 2 pieces to remain unglued while those start to dry. As that glue takes hold, I can start to figure out how the back is going to come together. I want it to meet in the center of the back of my chair, so I'm going to cut off the excess fabric and then fray check the end of that fabric with some glue. Once I lay down the first side, I can follow the same steps for the second side. I apologize for this being off camera, but it does meet in the center and the 2 pieces come together to finish the back of the chair. We are going to follow very similar steps for the 124 scale comfy chair. However, you are going to be gluing together 4 pieces marked H instead of just 2. These pieces are going to come together in the very same way, however. First, we need to upholster piece H by adding fabric to the top and then gluing it down the sides. Again, in 124 scale, when you get to the corners, instead of folding them down, you want to snip those off to keep down the bulk. When you flip this piece over, if you do have any excess fabric hanging down, it's really easy to do on this because it's so thin. Make sure to go ahead and cut it off at this time. This is now our finished base for our chair, and we can add our chair seat on top. Add glue to the chair seat, not so much that it will squeeze out on either side, and then center it on the chair base, making sure to line up the rounded front of the chair. You want to make sure that there is equal space on either side. We are now going to attach the chair arms, and I'm not going to be using hot glue on this one like I did for the 112 scale, simply because the arms are so small. There's a bigger risk of hot glue seeping out and permanently getting onto the fabric. So I'm just going to use a slow drying glue and hold it in place until I'm sure it's taken hold. I'm doing this for both sides and then carefully checking to make sure that they look identical in the way I've placed them next to the chair. We have one more fabric strip to create for the 124 scale as well. This is another 1/4 scale thick strip of cardstock covered in fabric, and I'm going to pre-bend it in place and then center it on my chair, following the same steps I did for the 112 scale. I'm going to glue it onto the front and sides, and when I get to the back, I'm going to cut down the excess pieces so they meet in the center of the back of the chair, making sure I fray check the ends before I lay them down. So now that the bodies of our chairs are done, we can move on to the legs. The legs are very simple pieces. It's just going to be multiple pieces that are glued together to make a shape. You're going to have 6 pieces marked L and 6 pieces marked K. You're going to glue 3 of the pieces together to create an entire shape, which comes together to create 4 total legs. You'll have 2 long legs and 2 shorter legs. The longer legs are going to be glued towards the front of the chair, and the shorter legs are going to be glued towards the back. I'm showing you how I place them, but you can put them where you like if you want them closer to the corners. This is going to give your chair more of a lean back, so it has that comfy effect. This is the same process for the 124 scale version. You're going to glue together 3 like shapes to create 2 front legs that are longer and 2 back legs that are shorter. You're going to glue them on the base as you see here, and now you have a completed comfy chair in 124 scale. Of course, you can paint this however you like, just be sure to keep the paint off of your fabric, and you have a completed chair for your dollhouse project. If you would like to learn more about the 112 scale and 124 scale comfy chair kits, you can follow the link in the description box below, where you can also learn about other kits from Bentley House Minis. Thank you for watching.